Jack here, JBF Music and Guitar Lessons. In this quick guitar tricks we're looking at microtonal bends using examples loosely based around various guitar player styles. Each lick outlines different variations of this musical technique, so make sure you stick around to the end to nail them all. So by the end of this you should have 5 new licks, know what microtonal bends are, have some idea of where to use them in a stylistically appropriate way, and have the foundations to create your own awesome licks and ideas. These licks are organised in ascending difficulty, getting harder as we go on. As usual, timestamps for each section are in the video's description, pinned comment below, and also the video's playback timeline. If you appreciate these tutorials complete with tabs, timestamps, and haven't yet subscribed, please give that a click and enable notifications to make sure you never miss out on new content. Okay, so there's a good chance you already know this, but in case not, a microtonal bend is exactly what it sounds like. It's a bend which is less than a tone, even less than a semitone, so a fraction, say less than a half, a quarter, an eighth, 2/5, just whatever suits the situation really. And what this means is it's a note which doesn't really exist in even-tempered Western music, being more common in traditional Eastern songs. As such, the microtone will often give a more exotic vibe. The other common use is in blues, but we'll touch on that a little bit later on. Beck is a great example of a player who utilises both of these approaches, and if you've never heard his version of the song Nadia, it's well worth checking out. I've actually covered that one before, so I'll pop a link down with the timestamps. But I mean, so how do you do these? You just bend the note a little sharp, or indeed flat of the target pitch. Lick number 1. For me, this is making your guitar sound like it's got a whammy bar even if it doesn't. Sounding something like Mick Mars from Motley Crue's solo for Shout at the Devil, or maybe the studio version of Crazy Train by Randy Rhoads. So first off, I'm sliding down very quickly to this note, then bending it sharp quarter tone. So we're not bending it a semitone, we're bending it less than that, just a quarter tone. What I'm then doing is keeping this bend held and then hammering on the subsequent notes to keep that kind of exotic feel. We return the note to pitch for the next set of hammers where I slide in and then just hammer. And you probably noticed from the playing demos there, what I'm doing is taking my fretting hand here and manipulating the string from behind the fretted note. You can actually do this to assist with bends as well, there's more on that with the I card up there. But yeah, while hammering on continually with my left hand, I'm just going to push or pull down on the G string to make it wobble in pitch. I'm doing that maybe 4 or 5 times, manipulating the string by pushing it, and then slowly pulling the string so the pitch gets raised. While doing this kind of final bigger bend, I'm also speeding up the rate at which I'm hammering on, just to add a bit of tension. So what you do is you slide into this note, bend it a little, hammer on, vibrato if you fancy it, slide into the next set of notes and hammer on, bit of vibrato again if you want, then loop this hammer. Move the string a little bit to vary the pitch. Pull it further. Speed up the hammers if you want to, and then return to pitch, ending on this E note for a convincing sounding resolution. To keep this clean, try using the kind of tip of the underside of your thumb, so sort of this bit here, to mute the A, E and D strings, so they're not going to ring out as much. You can even rest your second and third fingers on the G and E strings. So here this right hand can actually take care of a lot of the muting. If I strum through it, I've successfully muted out the strings except the G one, which is obviously the one we're manipulating and want to sound. And this will just help keep everything a little bit more under control. Now for me, this sort of lick is always going to be improvised. I'll go with a more intuitive approach, listening to what's happening and then reacting to that sound. But I mean, you might want to pull the string down in time with the hammers at the start of each one, so you might want to do something. You might want to randomize it a bit more. You could really milk this lick as well and kind of vary the little and larger bends or the speed all the way through it. You know, if you really want to go down the noise guitar route. And you could even keep the hammers the same speed all the way through. There's lots of variables to play with here. And if you like the sound of this trick, and let's face it, why wouldn't you? Because it's awesome. Let me know by clicking like and leaving a comment. Any sort of interaction really does give a huge boost to the channel. It really does help out. So in terms of the theory here, we're in E minor. I'm borrowing a note from the harmonic minor, that's major 7th. I'm bending it a tiny bit sharp. Sustaining that bend, root, and then second, which will also be a tiny bit sharp. So sort of a B for G or for G dominant idea here, albeit with a fairly ambiguous minor major tonality because we've got this kind of sharpened flat third going on. Then we have the root, second, flat third, which is the same group of notes that we stay on during this kind of a string pulling madness, which gives us this really kind of out whammy bar-esque sound. Slightly more familiar bluesy undertones to this one. It could almost be a B.B. King style lick, or maybe Jeff Beck or Steve Vai playing some Dorian. The idea here is we've got a kind of imitating a slide. For more on that, check out my Jeff Beck slate guitar masterclass with the eye up there. So yeah, we're bending each note after we play it, but never really letting it hit the new target pitch. So what this does is it creates this kind of glissando sliding aesthetic between the notes, just like how you'd slide into or out of a note. We've got a simple theme going on from the E to the B to the G strings, which we vary for the second bar, bending this note instead. Back to that first version. And to wrap up the lick, what we're doing is keeping this bend held and then playing the note a tone higher so it's a bit out as well. So sustaining the bend there. Then repeating this idea in the B string, bending the note a little bit sharp. Then playing this higher note while sustaining the bend. Sliding down here for an ever so slightly out semitone bend. I'm pretty much aiming for a semitone and having it just a little bit sour, probably a tad flat, just for a bit of edge. Then when you add in the vibrato, you're kind of bending it to pitch, so it doesn't sound quite as out. Alright, full disclosure, in terms of traditional blues, I've gone pretty much rogue in terms of microtonal bending. It is stylistically suitable. Blues 101 on quarter tone bends would be sharpening the flat third, the fourth, and probably the sharp fourth, flat fifth as well. Those are pretty common. If, as you've heard here, in a broader context, you can get away with a whole lot more. In terms of the theory, we are in an E Dorian. We're bending the flat 7th, then the flat 3rd, then the root, then bending the 6th. That's where the Dorian goodness comes from. That flat 3rd, and the root again. Same as the first time, flat 7th, flat 3rd root. Then what we're doing is hammering on this kind of a slightly sharpened second, or kind of flat 3rd if you want to think of it that way. It's probably more of a sharp second though. And then we've got the flat 3rd again, which we're sharpening with the microtonal bend. Hammering to this note here, which is a sharpened blues note, so it's kind of like a sharpened flat 5. Then sliding down to the major 7th and bending it pretty much a semitone, adding in some vibrato as well. Of course, without a whammy bar, unless we pre-bend, it is way easier to go up in pitch rather than down. If you do want to learn some real slide licks and get that more authentic sliding down and out sound of a note, check out that how to bluff slide guitar tutorial with the card up there. A George Lynch inspired lick here. I've done a much more comprehensive analysis of his style before, which you can check out with the tutorial card up there. But again, I've gone for a basic melodic and rhythmic theme, which I'm taking through the scale. Essentially, every note we pause on, the ones that we hold for longer, we go in a slight bend. At this point, I'd say a real trick to making this technique sound good is intent. Play the bends with conviction and consistency. Bending by the same small amount each time will just make it sound not too sporadic, otherwise it can be a bit too out of tune. Which I mean is the whole point, by conventional Western music standards, this is playing out of tune, but we do it in such a way where it sounds kind of convincing, like you mean to do it. That will generally translate. It's the old quote of if you make a mistake, repeat it and it sounds legitimate. Repetition legitimizes, that's the one. Anyway, this lick will work over an E minor, but also work over a B minor, a B, or a B7. They'll all sound tens, but will resolve nicely. Or we could go from an E minor to some sort of B chord. But what I'm going to do here to talk about the theory is just regards everything over an E minor, just to make it a little bit easier. So we have the root to the sharp flat third, because we're bending a little bit. We trill root flat third root, sliding down to the major seventh, which again we sharpen with the slight quarter tone. We then have a trill of the flat sixth root flat six. Then we're down to the fifth, which we sharpen. Onto the B string, and we've got the fifth to the sharpened flat seventh. Trill fifth flat seventh fifth. And here we have the sharpened flat fifth we're sliding down to here. This is a very George Lynch to do, very tense note to pick. And we have this final trill here where we're going from the flat third to the flat fifth. Back to the flat third. Sliding down to the fifth, which again, we sharpen ever so slightly with this bend. And if you hold this for a little bit at the end, and then bring it back down to pitch, it'll be really quite effective. Particularly if you follow this with some vibrato. You might have noticed that the blues note, the harmonic minor and legato techniques all work really quite well with this sound, this microtonal sound, which is a great framework for building your own licks and ideas. I see this as a Chris Poland. For more on him, check out that 4 signature licks video up there, or perhaps a Guthrie Govan style line. We're bending up by a semitone on your first finger on this 13th fret. Sustain that bend, then hammer on the 14th fret with your middle finger. Then 15th fret with your third finger. At slower speeds, like I kind of did on that last run through there, I probably need to pick these notes to help them sustain, but at a higher tempo, I prefer the kind of smoother texture you get from legato. You might want to pull the string down for this bend, if you find the strain is a bit much for your hand. But what we do is hold this bend and add some vibrato. Try to keep it nice and even, because this can really help sell this lick. But then this is the tricky bit. So what we're doing is plucking the 13th fret, which is still be pre-bent by your first finger. Maybe bend it a tiny bit more and slowly release it. But while we release it, we want to hammer on the 14th to the 15th frets. So ideally you want this legato to sound a bit wonky and kind of out of tune. We then return the note to pitch, kind of like just as you're doing that last pull off. Slide down to the 12th fret, add some vibrato, and then slide down to the 9th fret to finish it off. As a bonus tip, rather than do that 12th fret vibrato, what we could do is either bend it by a tone and a half, 2 tones, or even a semitone, which will lead into this kind of mixolydian sound we've got going on here. So on that note, to my ears, this lick will sound best over an E7 or an implied E dominant chord. You could get away with it over an E minor, but that dominant 7 to me really lets it shine. In terms of the theory, we're quickly bending the 3rd to the 4th, hammering the flat 5th, then the 5th, adding vibrato. Now, because of the bend being released, this bit is really quite hard to analyse, but it's sort of going 4th, flat 5th, 5th, flat 5th, 4th, but all of them are slightly flat, slightly out of tune because we've got this bend. The legato ends on this kind of 3rd, which we slide down to this flat 3rd, add the vibrato, or one of the bends if you really wanted. and then slide down to the root. So if we did bend that note, instead of adding vibrato, a third would give us the major third, a tone would give us the fourth, so maybe over like a dominant 7 sus4 chord, that might be quite cool. A tone and a half gives us the blues note, the flat fifth, which personally I really quite like, or the biggest bend, the 2-tone ones, would give us the fifth. So 9 times out of 10, I normally go for that because it's a chord tone. But since we're trying to get an out sound and we want a bit more shifty, that's maybe a tad too consonant. Lick 5 in the vein of Marty Friedman or perhaps Steve Vai here. Similar to the second lick, whenever we sustain a note we bend it a tiny bit, however this time we're also adding a tiny bit of vibrato, so it's like doing a slightly sharp vibrato. This is a tiny detail but will make it sound much more exotic. So we're hammering the 7th to the 11th frets, and basically when you hammer you want to hammer the note slightly sharp. So I'm hammering straight to that kind of bend rather than hammering and putting the bend in afterwards. You want to do it straight away. When you've got that bend, add in your vibrato. We're then trilling, sliding down to the 6th fret. Again, you want to bend this a bit sharp, and then add in the vibrato. Hammering on the 7th, the same wide hammer as before, but then we're sliding up to the 12th fret and immediately bending it by a semitone. So we're targeting this note. At this point, we're really not playing traditional or even kind of standard rock guitar lines anymore. It's quite amazing how wide a variety of sounds one instrument can make, with just a little bit of note manipulation. But anyway, sorry, back on track. We then repeat the very first phrase. Then there's a bit of a variation. It's a big slide here with your first finger. From the 7th to the 11th frets, we then hammer the 14th fret, pull back off to the 11th, hammer the 12th fret and bend it by a semitone, sustain that bend and hammer on the 13th fret. You can pick it if you prefer. Then what you want to do is release the bend a tiny bit, so it goes a little bit flat. And because we slid with our first finger, this finger is almost in place. So while still fretting the 13th fret, you want to move your first finger to this 10th fret here. And you can either pull off or pick the note, which will be slightly flat because we've moved the bend a little bit lower. So here you want to bend it a tiny bit, back up to pitch, which should be a semitone in total. As the note we're targeting is now this F sharp, that 11th fret on the G string. Okay, so I'll give you a second in case you want to analyse this one. Feel free to pause the video. But alright, this is essentially a D Lydian sound, but we're tapping into the Hirajosih scale. Now I've covered this before, so I'll pop a link to that tutorial down with the timestamps. But yeah, what we're doing is hammering the root to the 3rd. That kind of sharp vibrato, a trill going root 3rd root. Weird harmonic there, sorry. Sliding down to the major 7th with some more sharp vibrato and hammering onto the root. We then have a root hammering to the 3rd. We're sliding to the 4th, which we bend almost straight away a semitone to the sharp 4th. Again adding vibrato. And this note, this sharp 4 is kind of the Lydian money note. This is where the Lydian or Hirajosih sound comes from in part. We then have the same as before. We've got the root 3rd. Then we have this kind of trill, the root 3rd root. Going back down to the major 7th, hammering on the root. And finally we have a root sliding to the 3rd, hammering onto the 5th, pulling back up to the 3rd, The fourth, but again we're bending this up to the sharp fourth. The fifth, which we're releasing pitch just a little bit, so kind of like a bluesy note thing. Then we've got the flat third, which is very sharp, it's closer to a third, and then we just need to bend it up a tiny bit to get it into pitch. Those were 10 microtonal licks in various styles. This has been Quick Guitar Tricks. That's the playlist there. For more microtonal madness, check out this video. But yeah, hit subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Leave me a comment, share it with your fellow musicians, and enable notifications by ringing that little bell on the side if you feel so inclined. Cheers, guys.